So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming along. This has got to be the least apocalyptic setting I think I've ever done a talk. We are all practically sunbathing by the side of a river. And I want to talk to you just the next hour or so about the topic of my last book, The Knowledge. I'm a scientist back in London in the UK, and my field of science is astrobiology. It's all about looking into the possibility of life beyond the Earth. I spend my time thinking about the planet Mars and whether there could be ultra-hardy bacteria surviving on the surface of Mars, and importantly, how could we detect that they're there? What science experiment or instrument could we put on the front of a Mars rover to look for signs of Martian bacteria? That is my day job, if you like, is helping in the hunt for aliens. But what I want to talk to you about today, this afternoon, is on something completely and utterly different. I want you to imagine that this has actually happened. Can everyone actually see a screen? There's been some kind of global catastrophe, a worldwide disaster, some kind of apocalypse event. And the vast majority of the human race has died, and civilization has collapsed. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, that where we are right now has been some kind of protective bubble, and while the rest of humanity has perished and died, all of us here, we've survived the end of the world. Hooray! We are post-apocalyptic survivors. And in about an hour's time after this talk, we'll go out blinking in the bright sunlight and see the ruined devastation of Berlin around us, smoking with the ruins. And the question that will be in all of our minds then is, well, what now? What would I most need to know? How to make, how to do to help us survive in this post-apocalyptic wasteland? But I think even more importantly, even more interestingly, how could we go about rebuilding everything from scratch? Could you reboot civilization itself after it's crashed? Like after a computer has crashed and you push the reset button, could we do something very similar with all of the modern world? All these things that we take for granted. Now, I hope it's clear to you that I don't actually think the world is about to end. I don't have some kind of the end of the world is nigh placards down my front. I'm a scientist. But I thought this idea of the end of the world and the loss of everything that we just take for granted in the modern world, I thought that was a really good thought experiment for looking behind the scenes, peering under the engine bonnet of the machinery of civilization to see how it works. Where do things come from? How are they made? How are our lives supported nowadays? How could you go back to scratch and make all of that from the beginning? So what I'm actually talking about is, could you do this for real? Could you do Minecraft? Put up your hand if you've played this computer game, Minecraft. Now, I have played Minecraft once, and one time only, and I finished the game, and I immediately deleted this game off my computer, and I've forbidden myself from ever installing it, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the most addictive game that has ever been created. And the reason I think Minecraft is so much fun and so addictive is because there's no rules, there's no levels, there's no end-of-game boss that you have to beat. It's just an empty, blank landscape that you can explore, and you can do whatever you like. You can craft and create and build whatever you like. You have to extract raw materials from the natural world around you. First off, you walk up to a tree and punch the tree with your hand until it falls over, and you've now got some wood, and you make a tool using that wooden material. And now you use your wooden tool, and you walk over to the side of a hill where there's some stone being exposed, and you quarry that stone, and you've now got stone tools, which are better than the wooden ones you had before. And now you use your stone tool, and you mine underground to where you can find some iron ore, and you extract that rock, and then you use the process of fire to get the metal out of that ore, and I've got metal tools. This game, Minecraft, is like the whole of human history and civilization played on your computer. And how could we do that for real? Could we reboot civilization from scratch after someone, I'm not saying Trump, but maybe Trump, has pushed the reset button, everything is wiped out, and we start again? This is what I've tried to do with the book, The Knowledge, which, by no coincidence, is available for sale after this talk, round in the grassy bit around the corner. And what I did for this book, for The Knowledge, was look at all the different areas of our modern lives, these different themes of things that we take for granted, like agriculture and where food comes from, or some basic chemistry you need to support your lives, the processes of transport or communication. And I looked at each of those in turn and explained how you go from right back to basics and rebuild everything from the ground up. And I want, in this talk, to pick out just a couple of those themes, of those strands. But let's imagine we're in this post-apocalyptic wasteland, this end-of-the-world scenario, the things that we've seen on TV programs like The Walking Dead. Let's imagine we are living in that world. How could you survive by using your ingenuity and your resourcefulness to keep things going? Could you keep yourself alive and healthy and survive perhaps using only the contents of an average handbag, or perhaps the backpack used to walk into work on the Monday morning? These are some of the items you might find in an average handbag. There's everything here from an empty bottle of water, some tissues, a condom, tampons, chewing gum. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these items right now, but every one of those everyday, normal, boring objects can be used in a clever way, in an ingenious way to save your life. You can use it for something it wasn't designed to do originally. You can use different combinations of these objects to make something that will help save your life. So while I'm talking on stage, maybe keep some of those in the back of your mind and have a think about how could a tampon save your life if you're surviving after the apocalypse? How can an empty plastic bottle, how could a pack of tissues save your life? But if we're living in this post-apocalyptic world, civilization has collapsed, the first thing that's going to be on our minds is, I'm getting quite hungry now. I'm missing my lunch. How do I get food to make sure I don't starve to death in the next 2 weeks? Well, first off, we would go immediately to the closest supermarket, and you'll find row after row of preserved food, of cans, tins, pasta, rice. And I wanted to know, again, as another mini thought experiment, an answer to a question. If I were to take any one of you, and I'll put you in an average-sized supermarket and lock the door and throw away the key. Maybe you've heckled me, you've shouted out in one of my science lectures, and I'm punishing you by locking you in a supermarket for the rest of your natural life. How long do you think you'd survive for? How long can a single supermarket keep one person alive for with the food as you work your way through the shelves? And as a scientist, I wanted to work this out, to calculate it. So I went to the average supermarket, which was near where I live in North London, and I went up and down every row with pen and paper, counting every single edible thing on the shelves there, getting some very, very odd looks from everyone else in the supermarket. And I multiplied all that food together. You divide that by the amount of food you have to eat per day to survive, and the answer comes out that a single supermarket can keep one person alive for 55 years. Or 63 years if you're happy to eat all the canned dog food and cat food as well. And I think by that point, I would just give up. I would head straight to the vodka aisle and I would end things quickly and cleanly rather than eating dog food for another 8 years. Now, this is a frivolous example. This is a funny example. But the point behind this is that the only reason all of us here today, all of us living in the developed world, we no longer fear the coming of winter or of famine or of starvation. And the reason for that is because we've been able to apply our intelligence to stop food going off. We can stop food being eaten by fungus or bacteria until a human is ready to eat that food. We develop ways of preserving that food, of the canning process, or with refrigeration, which is a way of applying the gas laws, the physics of the gas laws, and applying that to make a little box of artificial winter. A little box that we can make very cold so that food doesn't go off in it. We've applied science to build the world around us. Now, it's not just food that would be very important for trying to rebuild. Here I am telling you guys how to rebuild the entire world, and I can't even control my laptop properly. So alongside all the food that you would need to scavenge in this apocalyptic scenario, fire has also been absolutely critical to how we've lived as humans for hundreds of thousands of years. We use fire to keep the cold at bay. We use fire to cook our food, again, so the germs don't kill us. We use fire to help protect ourselves. But as a society, as a civilization, we use fire in a very deep, fundamental way to make the most useful substances and materials for building our civilization. We use fire to take river mud, and we bake that into bricks that we build with. We use fire to get metal out of rocks. We use fire in every single one of our cars when we turn the key and we're magically transported down the road. We've trapped that fire inside an engine to do useful work for us. Now, despite just how important and central fire is to every one of our lives still today, I bet there's not a single person sat here that actually knows how to make it. If you can't reach for a lighter or a box of matches, how do you actually get something to be on fire? I have no idea myself. I don't know how to rub sticks together to make a fire. So I've got a short video for you here that shows how you can be ingenious, you can hack and bodge together different everyday items, the sort of stuff you could have scavenged from an abandoned house or deserted supermarket to make a fire for yourself. And in this video, I'm showing you how, ironically, you can start a fire using a fire alarm. The very thing that was designed to warn us of fire, you can use to start one. Here's the video now. Oh, he said with abject certainty. Believe me, I tested this morning. Well, this is starting to get irritating. Yeah, that's not working. Oh, what an anticlimax. The trick to making a fire with a fire alarm is you get the battery out of the back of the fire alarm, and the kind of battery you get in a fire alarm is a very special kind of battery that has two terminals on the same side, which makes it very, very easy to short circuit. Do not do this at home. And the only other thing you need to get is some wire wool, some steel wool, sort of thing you use in the kitchen for scrubbing the plates and dishes after you've been cooking. And you ever so gently brush that wire wool against the two terminals of the battery, and it bursts into flame. This is an incredible video. You can watch it on the book's website after I've built it up so much. And what's happening there is that you are exploiting the principles of physics. You are taking the electricity from the battery, you're passing it through a very, very narrow wire with high resistance, so it gets very hot, and it bursts into flames. You can use that trick to save your life and start a fire if you ever had to. But if you can pull off that same trick of passing electricity through a very narrow wire and not have it burst into flames, you've just invented something very, very important indeed. You just invented the electric light bulb. That's what took Arthur Edison decades of hacking and bodging and testing, of trying to make metal wire hot enough to give off light without also bursting into flames. And again, imagine how different every one of our lives today would be if we had to go to bed at sunset and we had to rise at sunrise, at dawn every day, and you couldn't just walk into the corner of a room and flick a switch and have an artificial sun appear in the room. Electricity has been fundamental to how we've come to live our lives today. If we move on past this, this grace period where we've been able to scavenge and forage what we need from the abandoned, deserted civilization and cities around us, and start looking into how we could go right back to basics, right back to scratch, to make and do things ourselves. And I want to look first at agriculture. How do we make food? How do we not starve to death? And right in the center of that is a very, very profound question that we deal every single day with our lives, but it probably never occurred to you that this is a strange thing to do. Why is it every single morning we get up and for breakfast we eat a bowl of cereal or a slice of toast? We eat cornflakes or bran or muesli or oats or barley or maize or rice, not just for breakfast, but for every meal of every day of our lives. These are all cereal crops. These are cereal crops here, and the first three of those, which are wheat, rice, and maize, those three plants, and just those three plants, have fed every single civilization around planet Earth throughout the whole of human history. They are the three most important plants for all of us in the human race. And the weird thing about this is that these cereal crops are all species of grass. Us humans living in towering skyscrapers made out of steel and glass, we eat grass every day of our lives in just the same way that cows and sheep and goats eat grass. We eat the same plants. But humans were faced with a problem. Grass grows very quickly. It gives you a nice little dollop of energy to eat. But we're not like a cow. We don't have 4 stomachs in our body. We can't actually digest grass that we'd want to eat. So rather than being able to apply our stomachs to the problem, we've had to apply our brains, our intelligence. We've invented things that enable us to eat grass. And the two most crucial inventions for this through the whole of human history have been the Roman water wheel and the medieval windmill. These are clearly ways of harnessing natural power, hydropower or wind power. But right in the center, right in the core of all of that medieval machinery are 2 slabs of rock, like a hamburger. And these are the millstones, and you force them to turn round past each other, and you put your wheat in between those, and you grind it into grain. We've been doing that for thousands and thousands of years. We're using wind power and the millstones like a set of artificial teeth that are doing something that our bodies could do, but we're doing much more efficiently with an invention. And we take that flour, and we put it in a hot place, in an oven, where again we use the power of fire to drive chemistry to turn that flour into something we can actually digest when we bake bread. We use the oven like an external stomach that helps us digest our food that would be impossible otherwise. These are critical inventions in human history. Now, I know that some of you are sat there going, yeah, all right, Lewis, all right, mate, I get that wheat and the windmill are quite a big deal. Yeah, the Dutch, they love their windmills in particular, but is any of this actually going to help us? Let's go along with your story, Lewis. Yeah, okay, the world's ended, but how is this actually going to help us? Where do I go to get wheat or rice or maize that I can put into the ground and I'll actually grow? You can't buy those things from Aldi, from a supermarket. And the one place that you would want to go after the end of the world to reboot agriculture and farming and feeding ourselves is this place here. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vaults. This is a library, not of books, but of plants, of seeds, of every plant species that we have used through the history of civilization is in this agricultural backup file. This is like a save file stored on a hard disk in case civilization collapses. Now, this is slightly inconvenient to get to. This is in Svalbard, which is an island right up in the high Arctic. The library, the facility, is built into the side of a mountain. So even if the apocalypse does come and the grid goes down, the electricity fails, the cold mass of that mountain around it will keep everything naturally refrigerated for thousands of years. There are double sets of blast-proof doors on the front of this facility. This could genuinely survive a nuclear holocaust, a nuclear war. And this is the one place you'd want to go to reboot farming. You would hitch a lift with some boat, navigate yourself over there. You'd hope that someone had thought to leave the door key under the mat. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble breaking through the blast-proof doors. But if you don't know where this is, if you don't know where Svalbard is, very, very helpfully, if you look down on the bottom left, I provided for you the latitude and longitude coordinates of exactly where that is on the Earth. You're welcome. But if you don't know what that means, where is that latitude and longitude coordinate? Where is that address on planet Earth? Or more to the point, what is my address now? Where am I? Where do I want to get to? What direction do I have to head in, and how far do I have to go? And if you turn in my book, in the knowledge, to chapter 7, I explain for you from first principles how you work out where on the Earth you are, how you find out that latitude and longitude coordinates, and therefore how you head off in the right direction. The very principles of navigation, which are critical through our age of exploration and building these trade routes around the world. I show you how you do that from scratch and from making things yourself from the world around you. Now, as our society is recovering after this apocalypse, after this reset event, the one thing that you would hope you could stop our society, our community of post-apocalyptic survivors from regressing to. We don't want to start sliding backwards in technology. We want to stop that regression, and we definitely don't want to revert to a state like this, where we've lost machinery and engines. You can no longer sit down in a comfortable chair, turn a key, and have basically fossilized dinosaurs, petrol, in your car, take you down the Autobahn at 80 kilometers an hour. You don't want to have to walk with your own legs. You don't want to have to break your own back and use your own muscles to dig things and build things and create stuff around you. We want to be able to use machinery and engines for helping us do that. And what I love about this picture here, this chap is looking particularly smug, particularly happy with himself, because he's got a car, but it doesn't work anymore. There's no crude oil, there's no petrol. He doesn't know how to make spare parts for the engine that doesn't work anymore, so he's chopped off the useless front end of the car, thrown it away. He's kept the back end, and like some kind of Mad Max post-apocalyptic chariot, he's hitched that up to some draft animals, to some oxen or horse. So how could we stop that happening in our own post-apocalyptic society? How do you keep machinery running when you don't have crude oil or diesel or petrol anymore? And it turns out you can run a car engine using wood as fuel. Not diesel or petrol. You can run a car using nothing more than wood. And the way you can do that is by using a process known as gasification. And I can demonstrate this process of gasification for you with a very, very simple thing that I made from scratch myself in about an hour's time with some very basic tools. And that's this Gasifier Stove that you can see in the bottom of the picture here. And all you do for this Gasifier Stove is you have a big outer tin can, and you put a smaller tin can inside it at the top and rest it up there. and then you drill a bunch of holes at the bottom of both tin cans, as you can see in the picture here. And then you put just a small handful of wood, of some twigs, into that inner can, and then when you set light to it, it burns nice and vigorously. You're drawing oxygen through the air holes at the bottom. I mean, that makes sense. That's how a barbecue works. There's nothing special about that. But what is special about this gasifier stove is that there's a second row of air holes right at the top. So after the wood has broken down in the heat of its own fire, it gives off lots of gases and vapors which are themselves combustible. You can burn smoke if you reintroduce oxygen to it, and you burn all of that at the same time. These gasifier stoves are incredibly efficient. Now, I don't get to demonstrate my gasifier stove live on stage anymore. Do you guys know of the TED Talks, the TED Lectures? I was invited out a year or two ago to do a TED Talk in the United States, stood right in the middle of the red spot of doom on the stage, talking about this thought experiment of rebooting after the apocalypse. And I showed off my gasifier stove and came that close to setting fire to my own face. I'd forgotten just how much hairspray they'd put in my hair, and I leant forward and almost set fire to my own head. So I don't demonstrate my gasifier stove live anymore. And instead, I've got a video for you of this working. Oh, come on. You know what? I don't know how a video can just stop working. Let's see if it works from the old-fashioned way of just playing it embedded. There we go. Can you all see that? So you can see from my gasifier stove, I'm just putting a little bit of newspaper, some kindling, and then a tiny, tiny handful of twigs I'm putting on the top. I'm barely loading any fuel at all into this thing. It's very, very efficient. And in a second, I'm going to light that gasifier stove through the air holes at the bottom to catch the newspaper there. But I'm using a lighter, just for the sake of this video, just to make it easy for myself. But I hope I've convinced you already that I totally could have done this by using a fire alarm and hacking the fire alarm if I'd really wanted to. And if you watch this gasifier stove, it smokes for a little bit at the beginning. I put the chimney on, and already, within 4 seconds flat, the smoke has disappeared and has now been replaced by a 4-foot jet of flame coming out the top. This is an incredibly effective way of getting the energy out of that wood by gasifying it. If you look in a second, this is where I almost lost my own face. I mean, totally do this at home. Be careful. Do not set fire to your own face. But that is the 4-foot jet of flame from just a tiny handful of little twigs. And you can see in this view here, where we've zoomed in from the top, the wood itself is not burning. The wood is giving off a gas. The gas is coming out the top, and there are jets of flame coming in where we're reintroducing oxygen with that gas for it to burn. So this is essentially a gas stove, like in your kitchen at home, rather than a wood-burning stove. You're turning the wood into gas before you burn it. Now, this is exactly the sort of appropriate technology or intermediate technology that is being taught around the developing world for people living in shanty towns in southern Africa or in Southeast Asia, people that have been collecting firewood to cook their meal in the evening, but in cramped conditions, breathing in all that smoke, and then getting horrific lung disease. You can teach someone to make something this simple using some old tin cans, and it is incredibly efficient with the wood they collect, and it is perfectly smokeless because you're burning the smoke. It's a much healthier way of cooking. But what you can also do is take your gasifier stove, scale it up from something the size of a baked bean can, of a soup can, scale it up to something the size of a dustbin, a trash can, strap it to the back of a car, and you can drive a car using wood as fuel rather than diesel or petrol or crude oil. You can see the gasifier stove on the back there, and at the bottom of that, there is the wood, which is breaking down to give off those gases and vapors, which you pipe over the roof of the car, down into the bonnet, into the engine, inject into the engine cylinders, and only then allow it to mix with oxygen and explode usefully to drive your car forward. Now, I will admit to all of you, this does look like some kind of crackpot, crazy, Mad Max, steampunk, post-apocalyptic contraption, but it works. It works perfectly well. You can drive down the road being driven by wood rather than petrol. And actually, during the Second World War, with all the fuel shortages, because we got very good at blowing up each other's oil refineries, across Europe, there were 1 million gasifier-powered cars, wood-powered cars like this, driving around Europe in our own grandparents' generation. People were ingenious, and they solved problems by hacking and bodging things and getting their car to run on wood. It's that kind of ingenuity we need to keep going after the apocalypse. I need to learn to stop doing that. Oh! Now, sooner or later, as we're recovering our society after this apocalypse, we're going to want to reinvent science. Science is a subject at school, but more importantly than that, science is just the way that you understand how the natural world around us works. And then you apply that knowledge to making technologies, new tools, new inventions for us that make our lives easier. That the only way the modern world we all live in today exists is because we've discovered things about the natural world and how they work by using science. And in the very beginnings of science, in the early 1500s, in our history, we had to first invent the tools that allowed us to explore the natural world, to test it, to look at it in different ways. We had to build the thermometer so we could understand about temperature and heat before we could invent the steam engine. We had to build the barometer to measure air pressure. We built telescopes and microscopes to see things which are invisibly small so we could understand about germs, why people die, and the telescope to explore the cosmos and the universe around us. Now, to make all of these tools for science, you need one particular substance. A substance with a unique combination of properties that nothing else provides for you that same set. To make these tools of science, you need something which is strong and chemically inert, doesn't react with anything, but also something that you can see through, something that's perfectly transparent. In order to do science, you need to make glass for test tubes, for watch glasses, and you can take your glass and you can mold it into a very particular shape so you can control light itself. You can build a lens to make a microscope or a telescope by making this see-through material. Now, I wanted to complete the most fundamental Robinson Crusoe experiment. I wanted to make some glass from scratch for myself in a weekend on a beach. It turns out that all of the ingredients you need to make glass you can get from a beach. You need sand for the silica. You need soda ash, which helps you melt the sand at anything less than about 2,000 degrees Celsius, so in an oven that you can make. And you can get soda ash from seaweed or other coastal plants. And you need chalk, which you can get from limestone or coral and calcium carbonate to help that mixture stabilize. So I went to a beach. I didn't go to this one. This is a beautiful beach. I found this picture on Google Images. This is the sort of beach I'd love to have gone to. I went to a beach in east of England where it pissed with rain the entire weekend and was windy, and I was miserable. But on this beach in Norfolk, in East England, I was able to collect sand and not seaweeds, but silicacia, which is another sodium carbonate-containing plant, and chalk, and I ground all those things up, mixed that recipe together, put it in a pot, put that pot next to some fire in a kiln to melt all those ingredients together, and made my glass from scratch into a lens in a weekend in this ultimate Robinson Crusoe experiment. I could have built a telescope the next weekend, using that glass that I've made, and just put my money where my mouth is. This is my Robinson Crusoe glass that I made from scratch. Oh, you are very kind, thank you. If you want to come and have a closer look at my Robinson Crusoe glass, come over to the book stand on the grassy knoll just after this talk. Now, you'll know that in the back of any book, there's always an author photograph, a portrait picture of the author, probably looking quite smug and self-satisfied, because look at me, Mum, I did a whole book all by myself. So you'll be kind of like this on the photograph in the back of a book. And I wanted even the author photograph to remain true to the premise of my book, The Knowledge. I wanted to make a photograph from scratch. I want to take a selfie, taking a selfie in the deepest sense you could ever take a selfie, by making it myself from scratch. So I went to Lacock Abbey, again in England, where photography was invented in the 1830s, 1840s, and I worked with an historian of photography there to mix together very, very primitive silver-containing chemistry that we made ourselves, spread that emulsion over a plate of glass, which is the sort of thing that I could have done myself on the beach, loaded that plate into a primitive single lens camera, and had my photograph taken. This is the picture on the left here of my selfie that I took. Now, you'll notice something about my selfie. I'm looking a little bit miserable. I'm looking a little bit grumpy and grouchy. And the reason for that is that this very simple silver-containing chemistry is very slow to respond to light. It's basic chemistry. So this is not a snapshot. This is not click. This is a 15-second exposure. I would challenge any single person here to sit absolutely still for 15 seconds without your head moving or your shoulders relaxing or your face moving the tiniest amount. Because the slightest movement over 15 seconds and your whole face blurs into this ghostly vision, which is what happened for most of my photos. I was trying to take them. So you can't smile for this photograph. You have to adopt a very relaxed, neutral posture. And what you can't see is that behind me in this photo, there is an iron stand with a skull clamp locked into the back of my head to hold my head absolutely perfectly still for 15 seconds. That is why I'm looking a little bit grouchy. And again, thank you, again, just to put my money where my mouth is, this is my photograph, my selfie that I made from scratch for the back cover of the book. I had it framed because I was quite chuffed with this picture. And again, this will be over by the book stand after this talk if you want to come and have a closer look. Now, finally, if you took any of this for real, and possibly the fact that you've come on your Saturday afternoon to an apocalypse festival might indicate that perhaps you do take this sort of thing seriously. And let's say we actually knew the world was about to end. Let's say we had 1 year's warning before a comet came out of the outer solar system, slammed into the Earth, wiped out human civilization, drove most of humanity to extinction, and we were trying to preserve the most important things that we have made, and we've done, and we've learnt. We wanted to build some kind of library that explained everything in the modern world and civilization and how we got there. And you could do something like this picture here. This is my favorite library in the world, or at least my favorite photograph of a library. This is Cincinnati's library in the mid-19th century, and it's 3 stories stacked high with books. It is an incredible library to go to. But actually trying to store information in this way is quite a bad idea. You need a huge building. And the books here, the information, are printed onto paper, onto bits of tree, which burns very, very easily after the apocalypse. Or the roof of your library could fall in and the rain gets in and everything moulders and rots, and all of that information you've tried to save just moulders away. But with modern technology, we can do much, much better than this now. You don't have to build a library full of books. You can take something like a Kindle or other e-reader, and you can load onto the memory of that device 10,000 books. You can have an entire library of human knowledge in the palm of your hand. You could tell yourself how to reboot civilization with that library you can carry around with you in your backpack. Problem with this now, though, is when the apocalypse does come and the grid goes down and electricity stops coming out of the plug at home, how do you charge your Kindle anymore? You've got all of human knowledge in your hand, but you can't bloody read it anymore because you can't recharge the batteries. So, for the sake of it, I hacked for myself an apocalypse-proof Kindle. I got a second-hand Kindle off eBay. I scavenged some old solar panels, which I soldered. I wired together with electronics, wired that to the bottom of the Kindle. So now you can access a copy of my book, The Knowledge, along with 9,999 other books in the palm of your hand. And then anytime it starts running out, you just leave it out in the sun and it recharges itself. That human knowledge is kept alive. And again, here is my apocalypse-proof Kindle for you, which I've brought along. And again, you can come and have a closer look at this if you like, over by the book stand. Now, if any of this has been of interest to you, you can go onto the book's website, which is the -knowledge.org. It's listed here, and there's lots of kind of how-to guides. There's descriptions about how you can make and do things from scratch yourself. I tell you how to make your own glass. I show you how to make your own apocalypse-proof Kindle. The picture here is how you can make your own Gasifier Stove. You could do this with your children next weekend. Now the weather is so lovely in barbecue season, you can make your own family Gasifier Stove for cooking baked beans and marshmallows on. There's lots of lists on this website of videos you can watch. The best books that I'd recommend are not just science and history books, but also stories and novels. Books that tell a similar story. So what I'm talking about here of going right back to basics and rebuilding everything from scratch yourself, like Robinson Crusoe or The Martian, which is a book told much more recently and is now a film with Matt Damon, which is basically Swiss Family Robinson, not deserted on a beach, but deserted on another planet. And if you've seen the film, a massive poo obsession and playing around with that as well. So you can watch all those videos on the website. And there's also articles you can read. One of the articles I pulled out here is all about Miley Cyrus. And there's another thought experiment in this article here. Let's say you had a time machine. And we're about to go back in time 300 years into the past. And we want to try to prove something to people back then. Something that they don't understand or they disbelieve. What scientific experiment, what instrument, what equipment would you take back in your time machine to the 1500s to prove something about the world and our place in the solar system? And I would take Miley Cyrus. I would put her into the back of my DeLorean. I'd go at 66 miles an hour, whatever it was, back into the 1500s, and you can use nothing more than Miley Cyrus and her wrecking ball to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Earth is round. You can prove the flat earthers wrong using Miley Cyrus. And if Miley Cyrus happens to have a watch on, when you put her in your time machine and take her back to the 1500s, you can use nothing more than a clock to prove that it's the Earth that orbits the sun, not vice versa. You can prove Copernicus right by using nothing more than a clock. And I explain how you can do those things. I don't explain how to make your own time machine yet, but I explain how you can do those things using Miley Cyrus. And as a final quick plug, a copy of The Knowledge, of the book I've just been talking about, is available over in the bookstall in English as well as German. I can sign those books for you if you want. I don't have to graffiti it. It'll be your book by that point. And there are also copies of my most recent book, which came out in Germany last week, which is called Origins, which is all about how different features of the planet we live on have affected the course of human history. So if you've liked books like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, Origins is like that. It's about big history and explaining where the world came from and how it was created. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for listening so attentively in the hot sunshine about the end of the world. Thanks, guys.
Lewis Dartnell, everybody.